Welcome to the Under the Hat podcast, the show where we talk about everything and anything that is top of mind in education. The goal is to provide meaningful conversation to what is currently happening in our classrooms. Stories, pains, moments of success. We want to hear it all. Welcome, friends. Welcome back to Under the Hat podcast. I'm super stoked because this is the first episode that I get to do on a Saturday morning, at least morning for me, depending on where you're listening to live or if you're catching this sometime in the future. If you are here live, please let us know in the chat, whether it's on YouTube, Instagram, what have you, where you're from, what you do, and if you want to, contribute to the conversation, please do so. So today, super excited. We're joined by somebody that I met a while back on the interwebs, right? Like most of the friends that I have, right, is meeting people online. So we're joined here by Dan Jones. Dan Jones and I, I feel sometimes, and I don't know if Dan, you would feel this way, but like almost like we share brains at a certain level, right? Like
Yes.
we both did similar strategies, similar levels of innovation, right, in the classroom, and we both taught similar subject matters. Because Dan, I believe you're a history teacher, or still are a history teacher.
Still am. Yep.
Still are, yeah. So I'm super excited for this conversation. We're talking about somebody, folks, that is currently still in the classroom, is really engaged in the innovation, right? He flips his classroom, to my knowledge. He really loves to dive into the project-based learning of things. But he's also a podcaster himself. I believe I've been on his show 2 times. Brilliant show. I'll go ahead and I'll give that space to let Dan talk about that. And Dan's also an author. I believe he's up to book 2, and the latest one has been his recent Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And Dan, you and I kind of chatted about that off air, offline, and I'm just thrilled for you with the work that you're doing. But Dan, how are you this morning or afternoon?
I'm doing great. Afternoon for me. But yeah, it's been a great Saturday so far. Just kind of taking it easy this morning. But I'm excited to chat with you today and to really dive into some PBL stuff, flipped learning, and wherever the conversation takes us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. And so I like to always start with, people that don't know you. And I know there's plenty out there that do. Like, you have a Facebook group, I think maybe more than one now. But for people that are listening, watching, that have, not really seen the Dan Jones magic, where kind of your context, where you came from, and like where you're headed in education.
Sure. This is my 19th year in the classroom, and I've taught public, I've taught private, and I'm currently teaching at a charter school, and I teach at the Richland School of Academic Arts in Ohio. And this is my 13th year here at the school, and absolutely love it. And but that hasn't always been the case for my journey. I got out of college and I was going to be the best teacher ever. And when I hit about I want to say it was year 8, I was extremely burned out, and I decided that I was going to be done, and I was going to exit teaching, and I was going to take a different route. And I went to my superintendent and principal, and I let them know that it was going to be my last year and that I just couldn't do it anymore. And the superintendent, she just smiled. She was like, I appreciate you being very transparent and sharing that, but I'm not going to allow you to quit. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, yeah. And she was like, well, just so you know, you were meant to be a teacher and you need to teach. You just have to find a different way to do it. And I was like, well, how else do you teach? You tell kids what they need to know. They memorize it, spit it back to you on a test, and then you press the repeat button. And now, mind you, I had done projects with kids for a while. And the difference was, though, that they were always my projects. I determined what the project was going to be,
Mm,
and I created the example. This is the exemplar, and they needed to recreate my vision. And some kids liked it because they liked having that example of what they needed to do. Other kids absolutely hated it. And I couldn't figure out why. So, as I started to research new and innovative ways to teach, I stumbled across flipped learning. And the more I read about it, the more it made perfect sense. And I felt like I had been doing education backwards for a very long time. And essentially, it looks at how we're using the classroom space and what's your best use of your time with students. And so when I started to look at that, a lot of times we send the hardest part, that homework aspect, home with kids. And we're asking them to remember everything that we taught them about 6 hours after we taught it. And most of us have a hard time processing conversations throughout the course of our day 6 hours later to be able to remember exactly what was said, how it was said, the steps that we were given. But yet that's what we were shipping home with the students. And so when I thought about, my time with students, they really didn't need my presence to be in my physical presence as I was delivering content. I could put that into a video and it made more sense because then students could go at their own pace. And I tell my kids all the time that I was in high school, especially, I was the kid who was always, we were taking notes off of an overhead, and I was the kid that raised my hand to say that I wasn't done, and then everybody would have to wait on me to finish so that we could move on to the next overhead, and the teacher could write out more notes. And so I was like, guys, you actually get to pause your teacher, and you don't have to try to keep up with me. So you get to pause me, you get to actually rewind me and see, what did he just say? And that was a game changer for a lot of the students, because the anxiety that they have in the classroom of trying to keep up with the teacher and the note-taking process, it's not fair. And I wanted to make sure that the students were able to really get the most out of the class. And to me, that was a great differentiation point in the classroom, because not everybody's going to work at the same pace. And that's something else that I always stress. Different paces, or working at your own pace, does not equal no pace. You can't have no pace. You always have to be making progress. And for some kids, it takes them a minute to figure out how to watch a video for an educational purpose instead of, the 30-second Instagram or TikTok videos, but they actually have to, really focus in on what's being shared, take those notes. But my classroom has just evolved over the years, especially the past, I would say, 11 years or so that I've been doing this. And I've figured out different tips or tricks that made processing easier for students, more thorough for students. Started working towards mastery, and I've been able to combine mastery learning with project-based learning, because you got to know what you're applying to a project. So it's been an evolution. And I mean, then you throw in AI, there's all sorts of stuff that has really moved my classroom along.
yeah, like so many there's just so much to unpack with what you just said. Like, and I, for someone myself that still flips my classroom for my adult learners now in the
Mhm.
adult ed and university levels, um, I I never like, you put it so well. Like, it's almost like I never thought of it this way, in the sense of, traditionally, whatever we learn, it's hours,
Hours.
like hours between like when you do the, and think about like for us, like in the secondary space, like not only is it hours, but how much other content are they absorbing or trying
Right.
to absorb throughout the day, right? Like they're going into our history classes and then they're going into a science class, a PE class, arts, like whatever it is. And it's such an overwhelming task, right?
Right.
And so I just love that point of like, you know, just the time span it takes to absorb information and then expect to do the real, um, I don't know, uh, repetitive exercise, if you will, of
Right.
whatever the content is, whether it's a math worksheet or maybe, you know, for us, it's like students analyzing a primary source, let's say at home,
Sure. Yep.
um, and rethinking that space. And so that I something that I'm curious about, Dan, is like, so for me, the biggest, like, I guess, shift or maybe culture shock was like, because I went from like talking to kids for 45, 50 minutes, maybe,
Hmm.
right? Maybe 35. And then, and then when you start flipping your classroom, you're like, wait, what do I do now? Like, 'cause
Right.
there's like now there's all this open space. And so for me, the logical thing was like, oh wow, we can do things that are more aligned to like PBL. So
Hmm.
was that your similar thought? Like, or did you have like a different like
It
transformational
was.
pathway to get there?
And one of the things that I had to do a mental shift with is that the projects that I was having students do, because I was like, great, now I have all this time for kids to work on projects. This is going to be fantastic. But I realized that the students needed to make the project their own. And I wanted to give them the freedom to develop their own projects. So something that was meaningful to them. And it's not mine, because I had a student tell me once, he was like, I hate your projects. And I was like, what? How do you hate projects? That's what every kid loves. But what he said was, I hate your projects. And that
Mm,
really stuck with me, because he had no ownership in the process. There was nothing about the project that was his. It was a school project. And that's something that even now I still have to talk to students about is, are you creating a project that is meaningful to you, or are you just making something for school? Because if you're making something just for school, who cares if it's done well? I mean, it's just for a grade, you move on. Um, and there's a lack of pride in what's being created.
mm,
But if a student makes something based on their interests, one, they're going to want to do it. They're going to look forward to coming to your class because they get to do what they love anyways. And they're just taking the content from the class and wrapping it around what they already love. For instance, I had a student who super passionate about Harry Potter. I mean, lived, breathed Harry Potter. And so we were looking at the three colonial regions in the US, and she decided that she would make a wand to represent every single region. And then she made potions to go with whether it was the economy or something. And then she developed her own little spell book, and every motion was either like the route that people took to get there, and where a particular um, colony was, or something. Every wand motion had a meaning, but she was so invested, and it created the most amazing project. And I'll never forget, because I started to actually take some pictures of the projects that kids were making, because I was like, this is on a whole different level, especially coming out of middle school. And the student said, Mr. Jones, I've never had a project of mine get a photo shoot before. And I was like, well, it's incredible, and other people need to see this. So
yeah.
that's pride out of a student when they see a teacher who values the work that they're doing to such a degree that they say, this needs to be shared. This can't stay within the four walls of my class. This has to be shared. And so then other students are going to start to invest more into their projects because they want the same treatment. They want their projects displayed in the classroom. I now have a museum of projects throughout the classroom, to the point where our building manager has had to add shelves in the classroom to contain all of the projects. And it's a cool component for kids when they get to see their project go up on the shelf, because they know it's going to be there for years to come as an exemplar.
Right. Yeah. But by the way, Dan, because I've seen pictures of your classroom like on social media. I'm always blown away. Like, that is such a cool room. Like, I'm like, if I was a kid, I'd be like, I wouldn't want to leave this room. Like, there's like Star Wars stuff in it. It looks like flexible seating, right? Like, there's like it just it doesn't feel, and this is what my students used to say about my room, though yours was a lot better. Yours is a lot better than mine was. It's just like, they're like, this doesn't feel like a classroom. Like, it doesn't feel whatever they have in their heads, like the rows, right? Just the seats all face the same way, all face the teacher, all face like so teacher centered, right? And so I wanted to point that out, but I guess my more important question here is, there's a lot of creativity involved with this, right? And so, like, what did you do, and what are you currently doing as a teacher to kind of get your students there? Because like I can kind of hear other teachers that I work with, that I train on a regular basis, they're like, no, my kids can't do that, because they have that word can't. So what are some strategies, tips, like scaffolds that you're using to really get those, to get your learners to that place, to have something that is of that kind of quality and has that creativity?
Well, part of the process, because when students get to my class, a lot of times they've just never been given an opportunity to create something that's unique to them. Everybody's going to do a diorama, or everybody's going to do the same sort of craft. And I always make sure to talk about the difference between a craft and a project. A project is tied to academic standards. A craft, we just do for fun. And whether that's coloring a picture or gluing things together, I mean, we do crafts at home. They're not tied to an academic standard. But in the classroom, if you're going to do a project with students, one, it's not the end thing that you do. The project is how they're applying their understanding of the content throughout the unit of study. And so a craft is just a one-time, one-day sort of thing that often is associated with, that end of unit thing, but it's also a filler. Often a craft can be a filler. Oh, we've got to find 20 minutes. Let's, we'll color this picture, or we'll do this or that. And it's not that those sorts of things are bad, but if it's not tied to an academic standard, we have to ask, why are we doing it?
Yeah.
So the students, when they walk in, and they start to understand what a project is, many of them kind of draw a blank, because they've never experienced an opportunity where they get to design it. And so I ask students, I'm like, okay, so what are you interested in? Is it Minecraft? If so, guess what? You get to play Minecraft in class and build a world around what we're studying. So I'll have students that are designing Renaissance towns, or they'll design Massachusetts Bay and, build their ships and all sorts of stuff. But they're invested. Beyond anything else, they're invested in what they're doing. They're invested in applying what they've learned. And it all of a sudden now rings true with meaning, because this is a part of them. But you're right. It is a challenge to get kids from that, I'm going to make something just for school, and I'm going to make something for me that I can use at school.
Yeah. And it changes the script for them too.
It does.
And it is like, because my experience was like, this type of approach, like both flipped and PBL, like it
Mm-hmm.
was the first time that my students, and they were, mind you, like part of my population was seniors, right? When I was still teaching high school, like they went their whole, almost their whole school career, right? Their K through
Right.
12 experience without even being told, like, hey, you get to decide what you design and you get to decide what you want to solve with respect to the stuff we're learning in here.
Right.
And that, I don't know, like that, to me, that's problematic, right? In terms of how our system's built out.
Well, and one of the things that I talked with students, actually, it was just 2 days ago, because they asked why the class was so different. And I said, okay, I want you to think about this. So often in education, we ask everybody to wear the same size clothing, the
Yep.
exact same size shoes, same shirt, same size pants. And the thing is, it doesn't fit everybody. Not everybody's built the exact same. And so we have to customize, for lack of a better word, or differentiate our classrooms so that we're meeting the needs of every single kid in the class. And that sounds really hard when you are in charge of making all those changes. That's an impossible task for one teacher to customize everything for every single student. However, when we step back and we relinquish control of the classroom and we put students in charge of their own learning, and that's not to say that we are hands off and they, we just leave them to their own devices. No. But when students are able to take notes at their pace, we've met that need. Now, I just provided the video and they're able to differentiate on their own. Then I was able to say, make guided notes. Well, again, made those once, but then they're ready to go for anybody that necessarily needs them. And students can just click a button and download those notes. And then we have, students that are like, you know what, I want to do a little bit more research on this particular topic. Well, they have the time to do that. And I also am able to meet one-on-one with kids and have micro conversations. So really, you just pop in, pop out sort of conversations with kids. They're really short, to the point, and you get to find out what it is they really know and clear up any misconceptions. And then boom, you're out and you're moving on to the next person. So I have more opportunities to engage everybody. And one of the things when I have student teachers come in from a university, one of the things that they notice is that I get to talk to every single student in my class every single day, which
Yeah.
is not normal.
Powerful. Yeah. That's powerful though.
So, and it's part of that building relationships with kids.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the thing is, if I have a student that is, they're cruising, I just have to say, hey, can you tell me a little bit about this topic? They answer it, I'm out. And on to the next student. So there's things that they know. One, they're going to be held accountable. Every student knows they're going to be held accountable. And if you know you're going to be held accountable, you're more likely to get the work done because
Yeah.
the teacher's going to talk to you about it. So it has been a complete turnaround in my classroom, the fact that I am able to do that as often as I possibly can.
Yeah. And so all that's amazing. I do know that talking with student teachers I've had in the past, and like now, like having conversations with teachers on more of a global level now with the work that I do. When we talk about flipped learning, so kind of if we can go back to the flipped learning conversation,
Sure.
something that I hear often, and I know, Dan, that you've been asked and approached by this as well. They're like, so more on like the behavior component, more of the motivation part of it too. Because the thing that I always get asked are like, well, what if they don't do the video? Like, what if, like, how do you intrinsically motivate them to want to watch your videos. So, and then
Right.
I have my take on that, right? Like, well, don't make like an hour-long video. Like, and
Right.
there's all these points that we all make. Just curious, like what you've seen in practice, like what works, what doesn't work.
Sure. Well, for one, you have to understand your students. Are your students the types of kids who will go home and do homework? Is their living situation one that is conducive for homework?
Hmm.
Or are they responsible for cooking dinner, doing laundry, taking care of siblings? What are their additional responsibilities at home? And you really have to do a reality check on the lives of your students and ask yourself, is homework the best option? Because if not, then you can do what's called an in-flip, where students are watching those videos in class. And I have students who are on lesson 3. I have students who are on lesson 5. I even have some students who are working diligently ahead and are on like lesson 8. So there's
Hmm.
a big difference between where students are. But the thing is, it's okay because they're working at their pace and they're making progress through the content. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't have to have the conversation that says you need to get to work
Right.
and you've got to focus and zero in on this because this lesson you're already like 2 days behind, and so they've hit a no pace point. And I found too that sometimes when kids go home, especially when your videos are on YouTube, they get lost on YouTube
Hmm.
for hours.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it's not that they're spending hours on homework. They're getting lost on YouTube for hours, and it looks like they're doing homework, which is then resulted in, you get parent phone calls are like, my kid spends like 4 hours on your homework. What is going on? Why is it taking them so long? And it's not. We just need to sit down and have a conversation with your child as to what is going on. So it allows us to zero in and a door opens for that conversation as to how students using their time. But a lot of what is developed in a flipped classroom are independent learners. We teach kids the skills that they need to become independent learners so that as they progress in their education, they have the skill set to be successful. They know how to study, they know how to take notes, they know how to engage with the content, and they know how to represent content uniquely. And so there's a lot of skills. We're teaching them a lot of critical thinking skills, time management skills. And the thing is, not every kid is going to be awesome at it because they're kids. And we
Right.
have to be patient enough to work with them to get them where they need to go. We have to have open communication with parents so that parents can help them and guide them when they're not with us. So a lot of this, it's a team effort. And yeah, there are going to be kids who aren't going to do the homework, but it's not necessarily that they don't want to or that they hate your class and they don't see value in it. It's they have so many additional responsibilities that they can't. And so the for me in my class, I always tell kids, whether you watched it last night or you watch it today, you're watching it. There's
Hmm.
the accountability piece. It will happen. It will get done.
Right.
Um, so there's that aspect of it of students know all of the work will get done.
Yeah. And so that, and the reason why I ask is like we have, when I was teaching high school, because I saw on Twitter at the time, Twitter, like, oh, people are doing the flip classroom, but they're doing the in class flip, like as you
Mhm.
mentioned before. And I was so like, I was like, I wasn't ready for that in my head
Yeah. Oh
because
yeah.
I was like, wait, I was like, wait, not the whole point, but part of the point though was freeing up this class space, right? Like
Mhm.
that was, so now I'm like, well, if we do it in class, it's kind of, I might as well just lecture at them, right?
Right.
except for I recently started doing excuse me, the in class flip with my adult learners. And so, this little night class that I teach, it's like a 3-hour time period. I only see them once a week, but it's 3 hours. So I'm like, okay, I'm willing to try this here in that context since it's a longer amount of time. And the thing I recognized was how much, at least initially, they need us to teach them to navigate how to watch a video.
Yep.
Like you mentioned before, like in an academic context, right? Like, and especially, and it's not just like the how, but it's also like, the problems they may have, whether it's technical or whether it's in their thinking, because like I would put it like, I put the video like up in an ed puzzle, right? And I would be collecting analytics and data or a screencastify, whatever it is. And that was great, but kind of it made them feel better that they weren't in isolation at home.
Sure.
So I kind of see now, if I were to return back to the high school classroom, which I may someday, I think I would give that an honest shot, because it does address some equitable concerns of the flipped model.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. And one of the other things too is, if you're like, well, I might as well lecture. Okay, students still have to try to keep up with you. If you're going to say, well, I'll just lecture in class. So you're not looking at the individualization of the process. Because if I have students who are taking notes in class, there's no way they're all writing the exact same thing at the exact same time.
Sure.
So I'm still meeting their needs in the way that they need to be met.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of going back to your point much earlier of the power of that pause button, right?
Yeah.
Like that rewatch. Like there's been, up until we, fairly recently, I'm talking like the grand scope of the history of education. Like there's no way, like back in the day, like let's say the 50s, we're like, hey, teacher, I need you to stop because I need to process this. Or can you repeat that 2, 3, 4, 5 times, right? Like that wasn't a thing, because and still the case for so long, it's been like, oh, we have to get to the end of that book or the end of that module, the end of that unit.
Right.
And it becomes like the teacher's like the sole proprietor of all of that. But now giving it through the means of like the medium of like a multimedia platform, like whatever it is, giving the students that agency, right, of being able to go through it in a way that best fits their needs. Again, I'm a big fan of flipped learning. I know that you are, Dan. If we can just transition here, because we're about 30 minutes in, I'd like to spend some time talking about your book.
Sure.
And so I know that you've written 2. Your last one's super intriguing to me in terms of like what seems to be the content in there. So I don't know if you want to talk both, or maybe your most recent one, but curious to hear about all of that work.
Well, my first book was Flipped 3.0, Project-Based Learning, an Insanely Simple Guide. And what it really was targeted at was the audience of flipped teachers. And for that group to then understand how to do project-based learning. And with my current book, it's called Modern PBL, Project-Based Learning in the Digital Age. And so it's still a focus on project-based learning, but it has a chapter on flipped learning because I want everyone to understand how project-based learning can impact their classroom. And you don't necessarily have to be a flipped teacher to do it. But I'm going to show you best practices and how that should be done. And so with my current book, I was able to interview some amazing people who they shared insight and wisdom throughout the chapters. I have interviews, like video interviews that you can watch. And so you just scan a QR code and you'll be able to watch the interview with that person right, before you even get into the book itself. And then there's an application piece. with every single chapter. Because when I thought about a lot of the books that I've read, there's, the great um, theory of doing whatever, concept is being presented, but then it just leaves it at that. It doesn't really walk you through how to apply that to your own classroom. And there aren't resources necessarily to help you dig into that. And so I wanted to address that issue. So
Mm.
if I present something in the book, I've also created something for you to then dig in deeper and make it personal for you. Because I've got a portion of each chapter that is plan, personalize, and pursue. And I really want you to plan out how am I going to use what I just learned? How can I make it my own? And then how can I deepen it and actually implement it into my classroom and pursue it? So there's different aspects of this book that aren't necessarily in my first one, but it's also made this particular book, I think, that much more robust. So there's a lot in there. There's a lot of great insights in this book, but there's also, I'm taking what I have done, and mind you, developing a PBL classroom, it's not like follow these 10 steps and you'll have an incredible PBL classroom. That's not
Right.
how PBL works, especially for it to work in your classroom and make it personal for you. It's going to be different than it is for me. And so there are things that I know are best practice, but it's a process of building those things into your classroom. I mean, this is year 19, and every single year I am doing something different. I'm adding something else into my classroom procedures because I realize, okay, this group's going to need this support. The other group didn't necessarily need that, but this one does. And so I can add that in. So it's an evolving process. And then you introduce AI into the whole equation. And that has really revolutionized even flipped learning, PBL. Um, so we've had to look at how do we do this? Because we now have a source out there where kids can just type whatever into and get the answers. Now, are the answers always correct? No, but it has a high accuracy rate, especially when you're dealing with history. So,
Mm.
um, because so much has been widely published historically, that information is pretty well known. So, in a history class, if I were to say, all right, I need you to write an essay on this particular topic, and that was the only assessment that I had, it's really hard to know whether or not it was necessarily written by a student or written by AI. So, to me, that's one of the beauties in project based learning, because if a student has to create, then they have to use um, critical thinking and analyzing and all of those different higher order thinking skills in order to produce something. And so, in my context for PBL, AI becomes a tool. It's an incredible tool, but it's not producing the end product. So, for instance, I had a student who she wanted to use AI for her project. And I was like, okay, what would you like to do? She's like, well, we're looking at the influence of the Roman Catholic Church on medieval Europe.
Mm.
And so I want to make a Where's Waldo style book, but it's going to be Where's the Pope? And so
That's good.
she was able to use Midjourney, which is an image generator. And so she was able to plug in all the different prompts. And as she's looking at the images that it produces, she's analyzing how well they represent the content. So yes,
Mm.
it produced something beyond what her skills would have been able to produce, but she's analyzing every single image, and she would be like, well, I really don't like, that cathedral doesn't quite look right. Or she would notice things that were completely out of context for the prompt that she put in. And so she was not only analyzing information, she was refining her prompting. And so she's building a skill there. And so there was just so much going into the project that it wasn't just that AI was making something for her and she didn't have to do the hard work. No, she's doing a lot of work in taking what she's learned, putting it into a new medium, and then analyzing that output to understand, is this what I want?
Yeah, and she's now, the student's now becoming more of like, how do I put it? It's low key engineering. Like
Oh,
if
yeah.
you think about like what, it's not just about like, hey, this simple thing, I need to write an essay on this topic, right?
Right.
No, I have to curate something, but what I'm curating is first of all mine,
Mm-hmm.
and second of all, it is nuanced. Like it's not, like if you have that large concern of AI, perhaps it's more of a moment to reevaluate, like, well, what are you asking of your students though?
Right.
And does it reflect this current climate, this current atmosphere that we're living in? And like, yeah, so I just love how she was able to think critically, not only on the AI, as you say, but what I love about that, especially from like a literacy standpoint, is like, well, okay, how am I going through the steps of the iterations
Right.
to get the product, to get the outcome that I'm looking for? Yeah, I think that's terrific.
Well, and there's a tool that we've started using in the classroom that, to me, it's one, it's blown my mind as to what it can do and how easy it is for teachers to set up. And that's schoolai.com. And
Hmm.
what it is, it's a tool that's actually designed for students to use. So it's FERPA and COPA compliant. And when a teacher sets up like a chat bot for the students to use, I can tell it, here are the questions that were the essential questions and driving questions that we're using in this particular unit. Do not answer any of them completely.
Hmm.
And I want you to provide a few details, but then follow up with a question. So it will give the students that, um, you know, just kind of like a tasting of the answer. And then it'll ask them, so how are you going to apply that to your project? And so it'll follow up with them. And because it knows, because I've already programmed it in, that they're doing a project about this information. And so it's able to direct students to think in that manner. They do a ton of critical thinking with the AI. And if a student says, hey, can you DoorDash me some food to the AI, it'll actually respond, it appears that you're off task. Let's get back to, and then it redirects them to what they should be doing. And that to me is unheard of with AI, because you ask, any GPT a random question and it will give you
Yeah.
the response to that specific question. But this particular um, platform redirects students to stay on topic. And to me, that is
Wow.
an incredible tool. And so when it comes to flipped learning, a lot of times, when kids are watching or taking notes at home, and we've often said, well, bring your questions to class and we'll discuss your questions in class if there are things that you didn't understand from the notes.
Mhm.
Well, I was able to embed a virtual Mr. Jones on their curriculum. So all they do is click on him and they can address all those questions at home and come in, and they're that much further ahead because their
Wait,
questions have
wait,
already
wait,
been
wait, wait,
answered.
wait, wait. Hold on. I'm trying to. Well, I'm trying to wrap my head on what you just said. So, like, they have a virtual Jones, a virtual Mr.
Yes.
Jones
Yep.
that is it. it's an AI bot. Am I
Mhm.
understanding that correctly?
Yep.
And you built, so did you, and hopefully I'm getting the website correctly here. And you built this out on this website?
Yeah, and it takes
Is
about
that,
2 minutes.
and it's written out correctly, right? Like
Yeah,
schoolai.com.
schoolalai.com.
Oh my gosh. I'm gonna investigate this like literally after we're done here. I
S
so and you just put that, you embed it somewhere like in the video or a document or the
Yeah,
notes, I'm
well,
assuming.
the cool thing is that there's a free version of it, which essentially gets you GPT, 3.5, and, when you give students the code, like, there's a code for that specific chatbot, they on the back end, uh, School AI doesn't see any names of students. They see a
Mm,
string of letters and numbers, so it's just a token. But as the teacher, I get to see how all of my students are using it. I see the entire conversation. And then I get insights that say, Steve's a little off task. And so I automatically get that. And you may have looked like you were invested, working hard, but you can't fool the AI. You may be able to fool your teacher, but now the teacher is getting insights as to how you're interacting with it. And I get the entire transcript of how you are interacting with it. And so that way, I have one stuff that I can use with a parent if I need to. I also have information I can directly use with a student. No, this is what you put in there. So I know exactly how the student is interacting with the AI. But if it tells me, hey, Steve seems to be off task,
mhm,
or Steve's putting in really short answers, yes or no type answers,
mhm,
I can then go and have a more direct conversation with you and touch base, make sure you're understanding content, what it's sharing with you, um, see if you have any questions. So I can intervene much more efficiently than looking around the room saying, oh, everybody's doing it. It must be great. So I get all these insights, which are awesome. But they do have a walled garden version, which essentially means that all of your students' data is protected. It's not used as part of the learning system for the AI. Um, it's all kind of housed on a server that's US based. So there's all these different regulations that they would have to go through to be COPA compliant.
yeah.
And so it also upgrades your GPT. You get 4 Turbo, which just makes your the AI responses that much more thorough and accurate.
Mm. That this is all new to me. Like everything about this website and what it does.
Yes.
That is, I'm so curious and want to dig into that on my own for my learners. Um, my friend Sophie, Sophie Youngs, has a question of like, what happens when there's no internet at home, particularly for the grade levels that you teach, Dan. I know that
Yep.
you're in the middle school, junior high space. Um, what's been your experiences, and how have you overcome those types of challenges?
Well, one of the things that we used to do a long time ago was put our videos on like a USB drive. Well,
Mm,
most computers don't have USB drives anymore, let alone CDs. Because we also used to put our videos on CDs and send the CD home. That way they would always have access to it. But the reality is that some kids don't have internet. Um, and for those situations, you have to be flexible. You have to allow kids to work on it in class. And you
mm,
have to set your classroom structure so that there is that flexibility. And because it's personalized and individualized, you now see the needs of your students. Whereas sometimes before, you may not have necessarily seen that. But I have had kids who also go to the library to get stuff done.
mm, mhm,
Um, and it's funny because even if some students don't have internet at home, often they have a cell phone. And the it's funny, but it's true. A lot of students don't realize that the same internet that you use at school is the same internet that they have access to on their phone. So if it works at school, it works on their phone. And
Mm.
so we've had to get past that, you can access all the same sites, and all of my content is still available on your phone, and we'll walk through how to set, how they can access that. And so there are different ways to navigate it, but you just have to know your student, their situation, and really be willing to meet them where they are.
Would it be fair to say that some of your students are engaging in the out of class flip while others are doing that in class flip? Like and I'm just assuming, but it sounds like you're differentiating that
Yeah.
for the ones that need it. Is that correct?
Yep. And the way I set up a unit is we have certain like benchmarks that they have to get to then work on their project. Because what I want students to do is I want them to know content before they apply it. Because too often, um, students would race through a lesson just to start working on their project, but they really didn't understand the lesson that they were covering. And
Mm.
so they're applying misinformation to their project. And so when you build in mastery components to the unit, and you say, okay, we've got to get through lesson 3 before we can jump into the project. And I want you to put lessons 1, 2, and 3. And we'll work on our project for 3 days. So you'll put in lesson 1, then you'll put in lesson 2 and lesson 3. And then we'll jump back into content. So the project is built over the course of time, and it's not just
Right.
something done at the end. But it also helps so that, if students are, just working at school, they know what pace they need to set for themselves. If a student's working at home and they want to get through as much as they possibly can because they really want to get to the project,
Hmm.
great. They now maybe they'll have more time to work on their project. So the project can often be the motivator to get the work done, but they still have to master content through their journey.
Right. Yeah. And so, like, now that you are laying all this out for me, like, if I were to go back and do this with high school students, I would take different approaches now, like, or at least like try what, like, a lot of what you're saying, because a lot of what I would do is, we start a new unit, and so let's say, like, the legislative branch, and so you
Mhm.
start a new unit, and they saw that driving question right away, and it's almost like it was parallel, like alongside each other, of like, we start the project, align it to standards while we were flipping. But what you were doing, from what I'm hearing, is like you would set the foundation content wise, and they
Right.
had to hit those videos or benchmarks before they even started the project, or perhaps got even remotely deep into standard alignment.
Right.
um and that,
Now, one
yeah.
one thing you can do, and I started this last year, and because I often felt research was super boring for the kids. When you're like, okay, I want you to research these questions before we get started, so you have an idea of what we're going to be studying, and they just sit down at their computer, type some stuff in. We started doing mind mapping, and so I have a big piece of paper for them to work on, and they'll come in, and as they do research, then they get up and they fill in a piece of the mind map, and then they'll go back. And so it actually gets your kids up and moving during research. And they're seeing what other kids are finding because this is done as a whole class. And
Right.
say you didn't find a ton of information about Article 2 of the Constitution, but you found a ton with Article 1, and it made total sense to you. And so you're filling out the section on Article 1, somebody else is filling out Article 2, but we're able to go over it as a class and we'll have all of that information accessible. It's so um it's so much different than just we're going to do research and move forward. And there's another great tool, if you have access to VR in your classroom, that it's called Noda, and you can do mind mapping virtually. And so students, they're able to wear a headset and they're exploring this mind map three-dimensionally. And they're able to pull in pictures and put pictures with people or places. They can write on the lines to explain how different things connect to one another. It is an incredible tool to allow students to engage with content virtually and three-dimensionally, which
Do
is,
I have that
again,
right?
very
Do I have
different.
that right? And it's
Yep.
NODA.
Yep.
Yeah, I
Because
just Googled it. Yeah.
it goes off of the term node. Like, this is a dot.
Uh,
So,
okay.
um,
Okay.
so the students are putting all these different nodes and making all these various connections, and you can change the shape of the node, the size of the node. So if this is a really big idea, big concept, they can make the node much bigger. If this is just like an individual date, they can make it much smaller. So it's incredible once they get in and they start working on it.
Wow. So Dan, I just have to say, like, no, normally I get to a point in the show where I'm like, oh, what's top of mind, and that's like half the show. We didn't even get there yet.
No.
But I think though that like what you laid out here is like so rich and so deep. Um, like from like the flip learning to the PBL, and really how you're using. And for me, I'm learning a lot of, like, being out of the classroom for almost 2 years now. That's
Mhm.
a lot of time in the secondary classroom. That's a lot of time because, like, I left and like this AI thing happened while I was
Yeah.
absent. So like these conversations are helpful for me personally because when I go back, when that time comes, I want to be armed and ready, right?
Right.
And so having these the schoolai.com, like having these things that are now being part of our lives as educators, especially if you are or were, in my case, innovative, like keeping track of all that. So I just want to end with, like, Dan, just super super big thanks. I know that people in the chat, both on Instagram and here in the StreamYard, like, people are just digging this. Like, you might get called on because, like, there's like still questions I can see. I'm like, okay, cool. So first of all, Dan, like, hopefully we do this again because
Yeah.
I feel this, like, we could have this conversation could continue. The other thing is, I know that you are on places like Facebook, like Twitter. For people that do have questions, how could they find you?
You can find me on Facebook. I run two groups. I run um, Flip Learning Teachers, and we've got a little over 5,000 teachers in that group.
Mm,
There's also Modern PBL, Project-Based Learning in the Digital Age. I've got a group for that as well. And I mean, there's, I think, close to 1,300 people in that one. But you can also find me on Instagram at Ideas for Teacher, just singular, not plural. And same thing on Twitter. So, I mean, those are great ways to reach out. I do have my website. I just started it, and that's modernpbl.com.
mm.
So,
I'll be sure. Yeah, I'll be sure to put all of this in the show notes,
yeah.
and then include that when I do the post on social. Really appreciate it. And so your latest book, is that out? Can people purchase that now?
Not yet. We
Okay.
are in the
Okay.
final edit of the book, and then it'll go to copy edit. And so, hoping for, maybe May, but it's I'm super excited about it, just because there's so much in it that it's not just your traditional, hey, this is how to do this particular teaching style book. There's, because there's so much application within it, essentially it is like primed and ready for a book study. And it's almost set up like PD, personalized PD for you. So
Love it.
um, it's it's definitely a school wide read. But it's something, where, hey, if you like it and you would want, PD done at your school, awesome. I'd be more than happy to do that. Um, and really spend some time with teachers working through the various aspects of PBL, because some of them are pretty nuanced, but they're also um, some things that are just best practice in general for teachers.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing and super. I for one am super excited for it to be released. I can't wait to read it and dive into it. And maybe shortly after that, Dan, we'll have to have you back on. And so yeah, for everybody that's watching, listening in the future, if you want more, and if you want to continue to support my show, underthehatpod.com. That's where you find all the social stuff, all the episodes. I'm at the moment on Spotify, Apple, and Amazon. I am taking next week off, doing a little bit of vacation with the family. And dressed as such, I'm headed down to Disneyland with
Nice.
Sam. Yes, so yes, Dan, that's another passion of ours is Star Wars.
Yes, Star Wars.
Yeah. So I'll be down there. But the following week we have another week of 3 episodes jammed into 1 week again. And so expect the social promos on all of that, and having a lot of authors like Dan, consultants like Dan on the show. And so people just spreading that love, right, and spreading like what their story is, what they've contributed, and how they can continue to contribute to our educators and education as a whole. All right, friends, thank you for spending the Saturday with us. I appreciate it. I'm sure Dan appreciates
I
it.
do.
Thank you again, Dan. And for the rest of this day, friends, keep your hats on but your minds open. We'll catch you next time. Have a good day.